Moby-Dick, by Herman Melville. Chapter 36. The Quarterdeck. Enter Ahab, then, all. It was not a great while after the affair of the pipe, that one morning shortly after breakfast, Ahab, as was his wont, ascended the cabin-gangway to the deck. There most sea captains usually walk at that hour, as country gentlemen, after the same meal, take a few turns in the garden. Soon his steady, ivory stride was heard, as to and fro he paced his old rounds, upon planks so familiar to his tread, that they were all over dented, like geological stones, with the peculiar mark of his walk. Did you fixedly gaze, too, upon that ribbed and dented brow, there also, you would see still stranger, footprints the footprints of his one unsleeping, ever-pacing thought. But on the occasion in question, those dents looked deeper, even as his nervous step that morning left a deeper mark. And, so full of his thought was Ahab, that at every uniform turn that he made, now at the mainmast and now at the binnacle, you could almost see that thought turn in him as he turned, and pace in him as he paced, so completely possessing him, indeed, that it all but seemed the inward mold of every outer movement. "D'ye mark him, Flask?" whispered Stubb. "The chick that's in him pecks the shell. 'Twill soon be out." The hours wore on. Ahab now shut up within his cabin, anon, pacing the deck, with the same intense bigotry of purpose in his aspect. It drew near the close of day. Suddenly he came to a halt by the bulwarks, and inserting his bone leg into the auger hole there, and with one hand grasping the shroud, he ordered Starbuck to send everybody aft. "Sir," said the mate, astonished at an order seldom or never given on shipboard except in some extraordinary case. "Send everybody aft," repeated Ahab. "Mastheads, bear. Come down." When the entire ship's company were assembled, and with curious and not wholly unapprehensive faces, were eyeing him, for he looked not unlike the weather horizon when a storm is coming up, Ahab, after rapidly glancing over the bulwarks, and then darting his eyes among the crew, started from his standpoint, and as though not a soul were not him resumed his heavy turns upon the deck. With bent head and half-slouched hat he continued to pace, unmindful of the wondering whispering among the men, till Stubb cautiously whispered to Flask that Ahab must have summoned them there for the purpose of witnessing a pedestrian feat. But this did not last long. Vehemently pausing, he cried: "What do ye do when ye see a whale, men?" "Sing out for him," was the impulsive rejoinder from a score of clubbed voices. "Good," cried Ahab, with a wild approval in his tones, observing the hearty animation into which his unexpected question had so magnetically thrown them. "And what do ye next, men?" "Lower away, and after him." "And what tune is it ye pull to, men?" "A dead whale or a stove boat." More and more strangely and fiercely glad and approving grew the countenance of the old man at every shout, while the mariners began to gaze curiously at each other, as if marveling how it was that they themselves became so excited at such seemingly purposeless questions. But they were all eagerness again, as Ahab, now half revolving in his pivot hole, with one hand reaching high up a shroud, and tightly, almost convulsively grasping it, addressed them, thus: "All ye mastheaders have before now heard me give orders about a white whale. Look ye, do ye see this Spanish ounce of gold?" Holding up a broad bright coin to the sun, "It is a $16 piece, men. Do ye see it? Mr. Starbuck, hand me yon topmaul." While the mate was getting the hammer, Ahab, without speaking, was slowly rubbing the gold piece against the skirts of his jacket, as if to heighten its luster, and without using any words was meanwhile lowly humming to himself, producing a sound so strangely muffled and inarticulate that it seemed the mechanical humming of the wheels of his vitality in him. Receiving the topmaul from Starbuck, he advanced towards the mainmast with the hammer uplifted in one hand, exhibiting the gold with the other, and with a high raised voice exclaiming, "Whosoever of ye raises me a white-headed whale with a wrinkled brow and a crooked jaw, whosoever of ye raises me that white-headed whale, with 3 holes punctured in his starboard fluke, look ye, whosoever of ye raises me that same white whale, he shall have this gold ounce, my boys." "Hurza! Hurza!" cried the seamen, as with swinging tarpaulins they hailed the act of nailing the gold to the mast. "It's a white whale, I say," resumed Ahab, as he threw down the topmaul. "A white whale. Skin your eyes for him, men, look sharp for white water. If ye see but a bubble, sing out." All this while Tashgo, Daggoo, and Queequeg had looked on with even more intense interest and surprise than the rest, and at the mention of the wrinkled brow and crooked jaw they had started as if each was separately touched by some specific recollection. "Captain Ahab," said Tashgo, "that white whale must be the same that some call Moby-Dick." "Moby-Dick?" shouted Ahab. "Do ye know the white whale then, Tash? Does he fantail a little curious, sir, before he goes down?" said the gateheader deliberately. "And has he a curious spout, too?" said Daggoo. "Very bushy, even for a parmaseti, and mighty quick, Captain Ahab?" "And he have 1, 2, 3, good many iron in him hide, too, Captain," cried Queequeg disjointedly. "All twisketbtwisk, like him," faltering hard for a word, and screwing his hand round and round as though uncorking a bottle. "Like him. "Corkscrew," cried Ahab. "Aye, Queequeg, the harpoons lie all twisted and wrenched in him. Aye, Daggoo, his spout is a big one, like a whole shock of wheat, and white as a pile of our Nantucket wool after the great annual sheep shearing. Aye, Tashgo, and he fantails like a split jib in a squall. Death and devils! Men, it is Moby-Dick ye have seen. Moby-Dick, Moby-Dick." "Captain Ahab," said Starbuck, who, with Stubb and Flask, had thus far been eyeing his superior with increasing surprise, but at last seemed struck with a thought which somewhat explained all the wonder. "Captain Ahab, I have heard of Moby-Dick, but it was not Moby-Dick that took off thy leg." "Who told thee that?" cried Ahab. Then pausing, "Aye, Starbuck, aye, my hearties all round, it was Moby-Dick that dismasted me, Moby-Dick that brought me to this dead stump I stand on now. Aye," he shouted with a terrific, loud, animal sob, like that of a heart-stricken moose. "Aye, it was that accursed white whale that raised me, made a poor pegging lubber of me forever and a day." Then tossing both arms, with measureless imprecations he shouted out, Aye, and I'll chase him round Good Hope, and round the Horn, and round the Norway Maelstrom, and